Yeah, for sure. That's great. It is very well done, without a doubt. Okay, so Shelly, I don't know whether it's moving too slowly to make sense for people, but you know, see how it goes. I'm gonna shut down on my end, okay? Sorry, say that again, Shelly. All right. So, we were just trying to think of that. I really have no idea. I'm like trying to remember exactly. Let me just make sure I can be heard on this thing. Testing 1 2 1 2. Can you guys hear me okay in here? Good. Okay. That's part one. Let's see if I can hear myself in here. Is the next question. All right. Keelan, do me a favor. Make sure is your doohickey on? Is your doohickey on your? Okay. Just play some stuff. Let me make sure the volume on that sounds good. I'm on 3 different devices at the moment. Just trying to make sure I can hear Keelan okay. All right. Everything seems okay. Uh, it always feels unfair that I get to take my mask off and you guys don't. Actually, I don't like. Don't talk to me. I'm. No, as are we all. As are we all. We are all of us here. No, no, no. We don't need any riots on our hands. That's for sure. Yeah, I mostly just wasn't just saying that I don't like being in any way treated differently than my people. There are some rabbis in the world who I'm sure may like that experience, but for me, it's always uncomfortable. That's why I like people always Josie would always try to feed me first, at the Torah study and stuff like that. And no matter how many times I tell her, just like everybody else goes first, and I'll be last, and we'll be fine. But anyway, how's everybody doing? Otherwise, it's nice to be real people. I'm trying to think of the last time I saw anybody that I knew in real life, and it's been a long time, for sure. Keelan, you've been warming up, I'm sure. Keelan, I think, we've missed the most out of everybody's missed us the most. Also, it's not the same without you, man. That's the one thing we can't replicate in the online space is Keelan. Just doesn't work. A digital Keelan is just not. Look, for all you know, that might be a new Bitcoin tomorrow. There might be a digital Keelan version. You can all get in on the ground floor. Crypto Keelan. That does it right there. Okay. Any updates from Neil? He made it to the mountain. That's all I needed to hear. That's all I needed to hear. That's my usual reassurance that he's in one piece. Hopefully, it didn't go too hard. I saw his name appear. I think that's it. So we'll wish a Shabbat Shalom to all of our Zooming friends, all of our streaming friends, and of course, all of our friends here at the Whalers Church, and to Keelan, who's back with us again. So, Keelan, why don't we warm up the way we used to? When we got no Lauren, we'll go to old school style. Yalla la 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 yalla la 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 yalla la yalla la yalla la 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 yalla la 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 ay la 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 yalla la yalla la ay la 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 yalla la yalla la ay la 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 yalla la 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 ya la la ay la 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 ay la la ay la 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 ya la 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 ay la 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 ya la 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 ya la la ya la la ay la 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 ya la 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 ya na na Shabbat Shalom. Keelan, you sound good. Fran, good Shabbos. Good to see you. Okay, so we're going to turn to page 120 to begin our service with lighting of candles. Again, page 120. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu mitzvotav v'tzivanu lehadlik ner shel Shabbat. Good Shabbos. All right, so we're going to turn now to page 130 as we begin Kabbalat Shabbat at the very top of the page. Lechu neranena, lechu neranena, lechu neranena, ladonai. Lechu neranena, lechu neranena, lechu neranena, ladonai. Naria, naria, letzori shenu, nekadma fana vetoda. Naria, naria, letzori shenu, bizmirot naria lo. Lechu neranena, lechu neranena, lechu neranena, ladonai. Lechu neranena, lechu neranena, lechu neranena, ladonai. Turn now to page 131, Shiru Ladonai. Shiru Ladonai, Shiru Shir Chadash, Shiru Ladonai, Kol Haaretz, Shiru Ladonai, Baruch Shemo, Basru Meyom Leyom Yeshuato, Shiru Ladonai, Baruch Shemo, Basru Meyom Leyom Yeshuato, Shiru Ladonai, Shiru Shir Chadash, Shiru Ladonai, Kol Haaretz, Shiru Ladonai, Baruch Shemo, Basru Meyom Leyom Yeshuato, Shiru Ladonai, Baruch Shemo, Basru Meyom Leyom Yeshuato. Turn now to page 132, or Zarua at the bottom of the page. Or Zarua latzadi, ulei shrei lev simecha. Or Zarua latzadi, ulei shrei lev simecha. Simchu tzadikim b'Adonai vehodu lezecher kodsho. Simchu tzadikim b'Adonai vehodu lezecher kodsho. We turn now to page 134, Zamru Ladonai at the top of the page. Zamru Ladonai bechinor, bechinor bekol zimra, b'chatzotrot vekol shofar. Hariu lifnei hamelech Adonai, Iram hayam umlo, Tevel veyoshvei ba, Neharot imcha uchaf yachad, Harim Yiraneinu, Lifnei Adonai kiva, Lishpot haaretz, Yishpot emel betzedek, Vehamim b'meisharim, Iram hayam umlo, Tevel veyoshvei ba, Neharot imcha uchaf yachad, Harim Yiraneinu. We turn now to page 135, Romamu, the last Hebrew paragraph in the middle of the page. Romemu Adonai Eloheinu ve'ishtachavu le'hakodsho. Romemu Adonai Eloheinu ve'ishtachavu le'hakodsho. Ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu romemu. Ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu romemu. Romemu Adonai Eloheinu ve'ishtachavu le'hakodsho. Romemu Adonai Eloheinu ve'ishtachavu le'hakodsho. We turn now to page 136, Psalm 29 at the top of the page. Mizmor leDavid, havu l'Adonai b'nei elim, havu l'Adonai kavod va'oz, havu l'Adonai kevod shemo, ishtachavu l'Adonai behadrat kodesh. Kol Adonai al hamayim, el hakavod yirim, Adonai al mayim rabim, Adonai al mayim rabim. Kol Adonai ba'koach, Kol Adonai behadar, Kol Adonai shover harazim, Vayishaber Adonai et arzei halbanon, וירקידם כמו עגל לבנון וסיריון כמו בן רמים כמו בן רמים כל אדוני חוצב להבות אש, כל אדוני יכיל מדבר, יכיל אדוני מדבר קדש, כל אדוני יחולל איילות, ויחשוף יערות ובכלו, כולו מרכבות, כולו מרכבות, כולו מרכבות. אדוני למבול ישב, וישב אדוני מלך לעולם. אדוני עוז לעמו ייתן, אדוני יברך את עמו ושלום. We'll turn now to Lachado D, page 138. And a reminder, we'll do the first, second, fifth, and ninth paragraphs. And for the last one, for those that are with us, we will rise and face towards the back of the sanctuary. Lecha dodi likrat kala penei Shabbat nekabela. 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 Shamor וזכור בדיבור אחד, השמיענו אל המיוחד, אדוני אחד ושמו אחד, לשם ותפארת ולתהילה. lecha dodi לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. lecha dodi לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. לקראת שבת לכו ונלכה, כי היא מקור הברכה, מראש מקדם נסוכה, סוף מעשה במחשבה תחילה. lecha dodi לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. lecha dodi לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. התעוררי, כי באורך קומי אורי, אורי שיר דברי, כבוד אדוני עלייך נקלה. lecha dodi לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. lecha dodi לקראת כלה, פני שבת נקבלה. בואי ושלום עטרת פלה, גם בשמחה ובצהלה, toch emunei am segula, boi chala, lecha dodi likrat kalam, Penei Shabbat nekabela, lecha dodi likrat kalam, Penei Shabbat nekabela. We'll turn now to page 140, Tzadik Katamar, where the Hebrew indents right in the middle of the page. Tzadik Katamar Yifrach Keres Balvanon Yizkeh Shetulim Beveit Adonai Bechatzrot Eloheinu Yafrichu. Yenuvun Veseva Deshenim Verananim Lehagim Ki Ashar Adonai Tzuri Velo Havlatabahu. Your eyes and body are spared for the Chatzi Kaddish on page 144. Yitkadal vehitkadash shemei rabba Ba'alma divrach yirtei v'yamlich malchutei b'chayechon u'v'yomechon u'b'chayei dechol beit Yisrael ba'agala u'bizman kariv v'yimeru amen. Yeshme rabba mevarach le'alam li'almei almaya yitbarach Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitbar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitale v'yitalam shemei dekudsha brichu leila min kol birchata v'shirata tushmechata v'nechemata damihiran be'hamam v'yimeru amen. Remain standing as we turn to page 146 for the Baruch Hu. Baruch Hu et Adonai habevorach. Baruch Adonai habevorach leolam vaed. Please be seated. Can I just tell you how nice it is to hear the responsive part of prayers? Like, the small things you take for granted. It really is very important. We'll turn now to page 148, read together in English at the bottom of the page. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, who speaks the evening into being, skillfully opens the gates, thoughtfully alters the time and changes the seasons, and arranges the stars in their heavenly courses according to plan. You are creator of day and night, rolling light away from darkness and darkness from light, transforming day into night and distinguishing one from the other. Adonai Tzvaot is your name. Ever-living God, may you reign continually over us into eternity. Blessed are you, Adonai, who brings on evening. Umavir yom umevi laila, umavdil ve'yom uve'laila, Adonai Tzvaot shemo. El chai v'kayam, tamid yimloch aleinu, le'olam va'ed, baruch atah Adonai, amari v'aravim. We'll turn now to page 151. We'll read together in English at the top of the page. As you taught Torah to those whose names I bear, teach me Torah too. Its mystery beckons, yet I struggle with its truth. You meant Torah for me. Did you mean the struggle for me too? Don't let me struggle alone. Help me to understand, to be wise, to listen, to know. Lead me into the mystery. Ki ehem chayinu ve'orech yameinu, v'ahem negei yomam v'layla, v'avatcha al tasir mimenu li'olamim, baruch atah Adonai, ohev amo Yisrael. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Please join me on page 154. Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha bechol levavcha v'chol nafshecha u'v'chol meodecha ve'hayu hadvarim ha'ele asher anochi metzavcha hayom al levavecha ve'shinatan levanecha v'dibarta bam ve'shiftecha b'veitecha U'v'lechtecha b'derech, u'v'shochbecha u'v'kumecha, u'kshartam leot ayadecha, v'hayu letotafot b'neinecha, u'chtavtam al mezuzot beitecha, u'v'hisharecha. Leman tizkeru v'asitem et kol mitzvotai, v'item kedoshim le'elohechem, ani Adonai Elohechem. Asher hotzeiti etchem mi'eretz Mitzrayim lihot lachem le'Elohim ani Adonai Elohechem Adonai Elohechem emet. Let's read together on the top of page 157. Standing on the parted shores of history, we still believe what we were taught before ever we stood at Sinai's foot, that wherever we go, it is eternally Egypt, that there is a better place, a promised land. The winding way to that promise passes through the wilderness, that there is no way to get from here to there except by joining hands and marching together. As we turn to page 158, Mi Chamocha. Hey ya bye bye bim 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 bam ya bye bye bim bam ya bye bye bim bim bam ya bye bye bim bam ya bye 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 ya bye bye bim bam ya bye 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 ya bye bye bim bam mi chamocha bailim Adonai mi kamocha nedar bakodesh norat hilot osefele norat hilot osefele ay bye bim 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 bam ya bye bye bim bam ay bye bim 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 bam ya bye bye bim bam ya bye 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 ya bye bye bim bam ya bye 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 ya bye bye bim bam. Malchutecha ra'u vanecha bokeyam lifnei Moshe u'Miriam zelianu ve'amru Adonai yimloch le'olam va'ed ונאמר כי יפד אדוני את יעקב וגואלו מיד חזק ממנו ברוך אתה אדוני גאל Yisrael. Let there be love and understanding among us. Let peace and friendship be our shelter from life's storms. Adonai, help us to walk with good companions, to live with hope in our hearts and eternity in our thoughts, that we may lie down in peace and rise up, waiting to do your will. Hashkivenu, page 160. Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu leshalom vehamidenu shomereinu lechaim. Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu leshalom ve'amidenu shomereinu lechaim. Ushmor tzeiteinu Uvoeinu Lechaim Shalom Me'ata ve'ad olam. Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu leshalom ve'hamidenu shomereinu lechaim. Blessed are you, Adonai, guardian of Israel, whose shelter of peace is spread over us, over all your people Israel, and over Yerushalayim. We turn to page 162, Vishamer at the top of the page. Veshameru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. עין עיני ביני ובין בני ישראל אותי לעולם. כי ששת ימים עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת הארץ וביום השביעי שבת Shabbat v'yinafash. Now invite everyone to rise in body or spirit, and we'll begin the Amidah together on page 164, and as always from there, continue silently. Please go at your own pace, and when you're finished, you may be seated, if standing. Adonai sefatai tifach ufi agi tehilatecha. Adonai, open up my lips that my mouth may declare your praise. Oseh shalom bimromav, hu yaseh shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'al kol yoshvei tevel. Yaseh shalom, yaseh shalom. Shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, yaseh shalom. Shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. We'll turn now in our Sidurim to page 371 as we prepare to offer our Misha Berach, our prayer for healing. We'll begin tonight by thinking of Chaim Ber Greenwald, Brad Friedman, Deborah Fogarty, Mike Klinghoffer, Chaim Ben Yosef Vechava, Norma Paulsek, Dina Batchana, Benzi Tepper, Cecilia Hirsch, Glenn Tinney, Tzipora Ahava, Gittel Bat Shmuel Ve'aviva, Bruce Steger, Chana Ruth Bat Sarah, Jeff Baker, David Tasher, Jim Cohn, Monique Rathbun, Lindsay Epstein, Dolores Michka, Sylvia Oren, Yerachmiel Ben Hinda, Paloma Chauhan, Samuel Moskowitz, Chaim Leib, Joyce Weinberg, Stu Pollack, Jane London, Catherine Guarino, Judy Stern, Miriam Cornfield, Raz Brody, Chana Ruth Bat Sarah, Fagel Tzipora Bat Elisheva Bat Sarah, Richard Gambino, Michelle Sawicki, Adobasha Bat Yitzhak, Tzvi Menachem and Chaim, Rivka Bat Devora, Amy and Gavin Tucker, Janice Kurz, David Dowling, Israel Ben Yitzchak, Ben Sion, Ben Nosha, Lorraine Danis, Buddy Kasaf, Shelley Newmark, David Kyle Klotman, Rivka Bat Rachel, Sarah Bat Chana, Moshe Eliezer Ben Sivia, Peretz Ben Yehuda, Leah Bat Naomi, Gedalia Ben Leah, Justin Banner, Tzipora Ahava Bat Yehudit Rachel, Jane Beard Cass, Amy Cass, Steam Levine, Ephraim Raphael Ben Esther, and Myra Maslin. In addition to inviting those watching at home to mention loved ones' names, anyone that is here with us tonight, we'll start on this side of the room and work to the back, and then this side of the room. If you have names, just please raise a hand so we can acknowledge. We'll join together on page 371 in the middle of the page. Mi shebeirach avotenu mekor habracha leimotenu. May the source of strength, who blessed the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen. Mi shebeirach imotenu mekor habracha lavotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen. Shabbat Shalom, everybody. I can see you smiling through the masks. I know it's there. That's good. No, really, I was saying before, it's like amazing the things you take for granted until you're back in a room with actual people. Even a gigantic room like this, it still feels close when it's you guys. And we, of course, are hoping that all of our friends watching online and our various different ways to do that are enjoying it as well. But it's good to be back. It feels good to be back. So I don't know about the rest of you, but maybe this being a rabbi or just who I am, but I've signed up over the years for like 700 different emails about Jewish things. And so come Shabbos, I get 20 different emails, all with seemingly interesting things here and there. And this week, one that actually very interesting popped up. It's one of those this day in Jewish history ideas. As it turns out, it's really, I'm bending the rules a little bit here because now we're into Shabbat. It's technically the next day. But as of earlier today, as of Friday, as it were, on this day in 1565, the first edition, the first publication of the Shulchan Aruch was released in Venice, Italy. Okay, so as a first starting point, how many of you know what the Shulchan Aruch is? Or you have okay, we see it's sort of like little hands going up here and there. All right, we're just going to test this theory a little bit. So who wrote the Shulchan Aruch? Okay, good. Now I feel very justified, and I'm going to teach you tonight. I was going to say, David, I know you're holding back, but very important rabbi as it happens, with an important history, and actually a very important thing to tie into our current reality. So I'm going to give you a little bit of history tonight, a little biography, and then hopefully a little bit of something on top of all of that. So the first thing that we should really think about for a second, right? 1565 in Venice, Italy. Okay, so remembering again the experience of our, not so distant ancestors living all over the world, Venice actually was an epicenter of Jewish thought and of Jewish publication in particular once the printing press is created. So from Venice disseminates all sorts of remarkable things. And it was actually a surprise to me, though, that was the origin point, the publishing origin point for the Shulchan Aruch. And I'll explain a little bit as to why. So the author of the Shulchan Aruch was a name that, again, probably wasn't familiar before and may even sound sort of not what you would expect, but Rabbi Yosef Karo. Okay, does that now ring somewhat of a bell to a few? Right, Yosef Karo. So again, if I said Maimonides to you, if I said, Rabbi Akiva, right, you'd know Rabbi Heschel, you'd know these names, but Karo, for interesting reasons, in our sphere, is lesser known. But his impact on Judaism, including Reform Judaism of today, is really beyond really reckoning. It's more than we can possibly understand. So that's why I really wanted to talk a little bit about who he was, who influenced him, and why this book came into existence in the first place. And for those that know nothing about it, why it actually turns out to be one of the most important Jewish books that exist, including to this day. So we have to go back a little bit in history to understand, as with most books, right, what preceded it and what was the purpose behind it. So I just want to say at the outset, most of the information I'm sharing with you today is readily available online, and I ended up actually pulling a lot of it, even though I was familiar with the material, from a great website called My Jewish Learning. Let's test the electorate here again. How many people know about My Jewish Learning? Okay, more of you should know. This is actually one of the first Jewish informational websites in the early 2000s was My Jewish Learning. It's really a very interesting story, and it's a legit and reputable source for information. And this particular piece was written by Rabbi Jill Jacobs. Jill Jacobs sound familiar to anybody? So anybody who was on a Trua mailing list over the years, she is the executive director of Trua, which we'll get back to that in a little bit as to why that's actually really quite remarkable that Jill Jacobs is the one writing this particular entry. But in any case, back into history. We know the Talmud is the sort of main source for what we would describe as halakha, of Jewish law, Jewish practice, Jewish ritual that was developed over a period of centuries, largely beginning with the Mishnah 200 CE, the Gemara following in centuries beyond, two different Talmuds, Babylonian Talmud and Yerushalmi. Just to say a little, these are thousands and thousands of pages of discourse, oftentimes very complicated discourse, in which sometimes all you want to know is, when am I supposed to light candles on Shabbat? Okay, so at some point in history, Maimonides in particular is well known for being really one of the first to attempt this, creates really a code of law known as the Mishnah Torah. Okay, so the Mishnah Torah is, at least sounds familiar, I'm sure, to a lot of you. Maimonides, I'm sure you're mostly familiar with. But as you can imagine, he gets yelled at by his contemporaries because there's something chutzpahdik about it. He's basically taking all of this Talmudic stuff and making it into something accessible, right? That the average Jewish, well, maybe not the average Jewish person, but a learned Jewish person could pull off of the shelf, look up and say, this is a holiday coming up, I want to make sure I know how to do it properly. But of course, who is Maimonides? To his contemporaries, we look at him as the great, but his contemporaries, right, he was another rabbi like the rest of them. So what gave him the right to determine this in the first place? But he certainly was starting on a path, mostly a logical one, which is that if we want people to be able to actually follow this religion, we need to have a more accessible version of it for simple questions than simply going to the Talmud, which can be, again, incredibly complex. So Maimonides is 12th century. A century later, another rabbi, Jacob ben Asher, who is known by the name of his rabbi, I was going to say, Bonnie got a little hand up there. No, even lesser known, I'm sure, but even more important to some degree, he becomes known as the Tur. A Tur is a row, basically, for rows and columns. It's a row of something. And he creates a work similar to Maimonides' work called the Arba'at Turim, the 4 rows. And he basically breaks down all of Jewish law into 4 major categories with several subcategories within it, except that in a similar vein to the problem with Talmud, the Torah and the Arba'at Turim is actually, you still have to be something of a scholar to be able to really discern what it is that you're supposed to do. So then, not so long after that, this is now beginning, Yosef Caro was born in 1488 in Spain to a prominent Spanish Jewish family. Okay, now remember the date, 1488 in particular, begins his life, right, at a certain moment in a unfortunately ignoble moment in the history of Jews, especially living in Spain, not too far into the future, is the expulsion. So his family begins again in a very good position in Spain, and like many, many people who were lucky enough to escape without being killed or forcefully converted, leaves Spanish world, leaves the Spanish Jewish world, and travels. His father is, I think, in the end, actually is killed, and he lives with his uncle Isaac, and they move to Turkey, of all places. And he lives for many years in Turkey, and then eventually the two of them end up in Tzfat. So Tzfat, we're starting to get closer to things we recognize, right? We all know where Tzfat is, more or less. Okay, so located in the northern part of Israel. We'll put it at the top of our list for where we'll visit when we go back. This is the epicenter of Kabbalistic thought in that period of time. So really all of the sort of the Kabbalistic geniuses, including Isaac Luria, the Ari, are all located in Tzfat at this particular time. And Kabbalah is really starting to create its real own identity, its own sort of feeling. And so you take this guy Caro, who himself is a lawyer by trade, he's a jurist, he thinks in legal terms, and then you mix that with this unbelievably mystical, perhaps even conceivably out there stuff going on in Tzfat. And all of this ends up having a very significant impact on Caro, including his study of the Arba'at Turim, the work of the Torah, the work of his predecessor, who had again attempted to take this gigantic body of knowledge and make it somewhat accessible. So originally, Caro starts out, he doesn't exactly go in the direction of trying to make it more accessible. He wants to provide even greater context to what was written in the Arba'at Turim by the Tur a generation earlier. And he wants to fill in some gaps, he wants to provide some background information, and he creates something that he refers to as the Beit Yosef. So Beit, the Bait, is a house, Yosef as we know, and the reason that we are told that he called it that was to provide a home for all of the legal opinions held by the jurists of the past. In other words, using the idea of Joseph, Beit Yosef, as being all of us derived from, and he wanted to create something that was even more encompassing of the Torah. So we're getting sort of further away from Maimonides' original idea of something that is tangible, something that people can pull off the shelf and can give them direction. But at some point or another, he realizes that there is this need, right? There's a need for something that is more concise, something that is more focused, something that takes the idea of what the Torah was trying to do, but makes it even more accessible. And he has another reason why he feels like he needs to write another book. In the introduction to Beit Yosef, he says that after the expulsion of Jews from Spain, and this is quoting from Rabbi Jacobs directly, and their subsequent dispersion amongst the Ashkenazic communities, right? So remember again, all of these Jews in Spain and Portugal are all now moving and intermingling with a community that actually had a lot of different customs and practices. Okay, suddenly these Sephardic Jews found themselves in this inherited traditions derived from the Ashkenazi Jews where they were now moving. And with that, there was a dismantling taking place of Sephardic communities, and it was no longer clear who had authority to decide in matters of law. In other words, you had this sort of commingling of two traditions and two different ways of thinking about Jewish law. It suddenly is a lot of disclarity as to what is the proper way to do things. So in this case, he decides he's going to present everything that he can in the Beit Yosef to try to announce and answer all of those concerns. But as I said, he just realizes in the end it's too much. So eventually he decides to create another work, and this is the work that he is known for to this day, the one that I referred to at the beginning as the Shulchan Aruch. So for our Hebraists in the room, do we know what Shulchan Aruch means? All right, Ira, very good. A set table, okay? Imagine, right, if any of you watch Downton Abbey, okay? Picture Downton Abbey level of precision, okay? This fork is not going to be over there. It's going to be right here. Right? That spoon is going to be right there. There is a predictability and there is a consistency about it, whether you are eating in this castle or this home or that home. You know you can go to this source as a Shulchan Aruch, a perfectly set out table in that way. And so basically this predecessor work, the Beit Yosef, becomes in a sense, as Rabbi Jacobs points out, kind of the notes that lead to the Shulchan Aruch, which would become his most famous and influential work. And indeed, that's what happens. So just a few words about how this work is organized and what it ultimately means to us. As I said, it's largely based off of the structure of the Arba'at Turim, of 4 sort of complete rows. And so those 4 rows are divided into, as I said, fairly significant concepts within Judaism as a whole. I'll just quickly say them. You can study them more at home. Orach Chaim, which are laws relating to prayer, Shabbat, and holiday observance, and other rituals of everyday life. Yoredea, the laws of kashrut, tzedakah, conversion, and other ritual matters. The Even Ha'etzer, the laws relating to women and marriage. And the Choshen Mishpat, laws related to civil law, including sections on lending money, renting, buying homes, and worker-employee relations. So, as I said, this covers everything from the ritual, from the, how do you celebrate Yom Kippur properly, to how do you actually interact properly with your employees? How do you make sure that people are being paid accordingly, and so on. So here you have now, again, a structure built on something that's familiar, but instead of it being like this and gigantic, you now have, a book about yay big that even a person who's of modest means or a community of modest means can purchase, and now suddenly has a resource for that question of if Havdalah, or second night of Pesach, for example, falls on the end of Shabbat. What are you supposed to do when it comes to the Seder, right? So these are questions that you probably would never think of until you encounter them. And now, instead of having to write a letter that's going to take 6 weeks from the rabbi to respond, okay, probably too many connections to real-life rabbis in that sense, but in this case, right, you now have a book, and you can go to this book. So Jacobs adds a few added layers to this, which is to go back to this question about the influence of mysticism on Karl. So she says, it may seem strange that Karl was simultaneously a mystic and the most important codifier of Jewish law in the same hand, right? So just to be very clear, the Shulchan Aruch to this day is the dominant document that, whether from the most ultra-Orthodox to anybody else who wants to find a definitive answer about a question, it is usually the first place you're going to look. And the only addition which happened shortly after is, remember, Karo was a Sephardic rabbi, so he wrote according to Sephardic law and custom. There is another document written by another rabbi named Moses Israelis called the Mapah. Anybody? This is a deep cut to see if Ira knows the Mapah. No, Mapah means a tablecloth. Okay, so just for all of us Ashkenazis in the room and thinking about our hubris, right? It's basically taking the set table, but saying our thing is really the thing that goes right on top of it. But it's basically, if you buy a copy of the Shulchan Aruch, you'll see the original, and then in little letters next to, you'll see what are called glosses to give us the Ashkenazic way in which they do things. So it really is a single compendium for basically most Jews who live in the world today. And therefore, as she says, as Rabbi Jacob says, that he in the end is one of the most important, if not the most important codifier of Jewish law in history, and yet he was also a mystic, not something we would associate with the legal sense of things. And she says, we tend to associate mystics with meditative practice and with an emphasis on achieving visions of the divine. When we imagine a medieval legal scholar, we might conjure up an image of a very serious man who spends his days bent over a set of musty books. However, within the context of the mystical circle of Sfat, Karo's double identity makes a certain kind of sense. For Isaac Luria, the Ari in his school, who was the great leader of the Kabbalistic school in Sfat, the goal of religious observance, in other words, the following of halacha, was to reunite the parts of the divine being that had been scattered as a result of human disobedience. This process, she says, was known as a tikkun, fixing, if that sounds a little more familiar to everybody, okay, required, first and foremost, the practice of mitzvot. In order to do tikkun work, you have to practice the mitzvot. Luria and his followers believed that the performance of each mitzvah helped in some way to unify the various aspects of God. The composition of a compendium of Jewish law would thus help Jews to participate in this tikkun. In other words, our false assumption, our false dichotomy of saying you can either be a legal jurist or you can be a mystic, that Judaism can either be rigidly legal or out there spiritual, is not factually correct. It is a mixture, an admixture of these two realities. And then actually, when you have a greater sense of what the mitzvot are, what the expectations are, what we should be doing, and we act upon them, we create the kind of tikkun that the mystics are envisioning when they create, for example, Kabbalat Shabbat, right? When they create this sense of we actually can have an impact in the world. The world relies on us to do certain things. We as Jews have a list of those things to do, and they're very specific, and they have very specific guidelines about when to do things. So now the question is, as a Reform congregation in Sag Harbor on a sleepy night in February, right, what does all of this have to ultimately do with us? Let me tell you this much. It does have a lot to do with you. It should have a lot to do with you. Every one of us should know what the Shulchan Aruch is. We should know where to access it. We should know how to use it. And even if we don't follow it, even if there are many elements, and I will tell you right now, there are many elements of it that I do not personally follow, nor have I in my entire life. It is still the single source that I go to when I have an immediate question about how to do something, or to understand what was the logic behind it when the rabbis decided, or when Kara decided that this was amongst the various ways to do things the proper way. In the end, I also want to make a sort of meta commentary here, which is, as I pointed out at the beginning, who wrote this article that I was, pulling most of the information from for tonight? Rabbi Jill Jacobs, who herself is identified as a woman and is the leader of Truah, which I would say is, of the progressive Jewish organizations in the world, is perhaps the most progressive. So we can learn something from the fact that, A, her writing this means that she herself sees a great value in what the Shulchan Aruch is, even though I can guarantee you, especially when you get to the sections related to women, there are plenty of things in there that I'm sure would make her rather uncomfortable. Okay, that's the first statement of it. And the second is that on a website called My Jewish Learning, that we proudly identified that a woman is writing the article about this particular document, which again, in certain parts of the Jewish world would be considered impossible, right? If not something worse than that. So to me, it wasn't lost that there was a conscious choice to have her write, and she is a brilliant rabbi who wrote a brilliant, thoughtful piece. Not just the factual pieces of it, but as I said, some very important insights related to it. And ultimately speaking, however we ourselves may follow or not follow the mitzvot, however we may think about halakha in general, however our community may wrestle with the balancing act between that which is traditional and that which is part of our more reform identity, all of these things, the conversation starts with the Shulchan Aruch. And the Shulchan Aruch can't mean anything to us unless we know what it is, unless we know who wrote it, unless we know when it comes from, unless we know what influenced it and caused its existence to be something that we needed, right? That there was a necessity for then, and not to be lost on us that a book that was first published, at this point, centuries ago, is still the dominant source for Jews living all over the world. It is perhaps the most printed document other than the Talmud and the Torah, the most commonly found throughout the world in so many different languages you can't begin to imagine. So what I will leave you with tonight is to know you don't even have to buy a copy yourself anymore. There is this wonderful website that I will tell you about every time I can called Sefaria. You can go to Sefaria. There is an English version of it. You can read it. You can check it out when you have a question. You can test its organizational structure, right? You say, I want to know about X. My guess is that with a few clicks, you'll actually find an answer. Whether you like that answer is a very different story. You can call me and argue with me about it if you'd like. But in the end, understanding who we are, right, individually, and I think collectively as a congregation, as part of the Reform movement, still has a direct relationship to this document. And my greatest teachers, every single one of them, actually, I was very lucky that I had some really remarkable teachers of my time at HUC. Every one of them would have been expert in using this document. Every single one of them. And to this day, I'm sure, I'm looking at Mark and Wendy, I'm sure to this day that the professors at HUC, right, every one of them has a copy of the Shulchan Aruch within their grasp. So it's part of us. It's part of our heritage. And I hope that you took away at least a few facts tonight. And the beauty is you don't have to remember everything that I said because it's all there. You can go and study it and go and search, right? That's the beauty point. I bring it to you hopefully so that we can then take the next step. And if anybody really has any interest in studying a little bit of it, I would be more than happy to do that. So with that, I wish you all a Shabbat Shalom. And what a great piece of history to connect to, I think, all those years ago. We'll turn back now to our Sidurim, our prayer books, page 586 at the very bottom of the page. Please rise. Aleinu l'shabeach v'adon hakol atet gidula liotzer breshit shelo asanu kegoye haratzot velo tzamanu kemishmetot adama shelo sam chelkenu kahem וגור עלינו ככל המונם, ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים, הקדוש ברוך הוא. We're now on page 591. ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, Ushemo, Ushemo, Ushemo Echad. I'll invite those in mourning and those observing yahrzeit to please remain standing. Everyone else may be seated at this time. We'll begin by thinking of those in our community who have passed in recent months. Dr. John Abderkin, Morris Dickstein, Faith Diskin, Linda Donath, Jay Fagan, Ellen Frank, Sandra Furman, Evelyn Gelb, Arthur Grossman, Gerald Hirsch, Mark Joseph, Deirdre Klein, Jeanette Kopp, Leo Leibowitz, William Lippman, Audrey Lubo, Morty Lynn, Jerry Monroe, Nancy Nagel, Harry Olstein, Geraldine Rosen, Harriet Roth, Jeannie Rubin, Howard Schreier, David Senft, Paul Silver, Marlise Silverberg, Blanche Sklar, Rita Sandra Snyder, and Joan Strong Tangzilius. We also mark the yahrzeits that occurred during the last week for Vala Amsterdam, Tessie Bender, Sam Berman, Murray Charish, Muriel Fearman, Ira Flesh, Rose Goldberg, Ida Goldfarb, Barry Goodstadt, Sarah Harkavay, Mildred Hellman, Roberta Herbert, Jerry Hirsch, Philip Idone, Joseph Jonas, Saul Klausner, Elsie Chris, Frank Levitt, Rose Levine, Warren Levy, Harry Matlis, Edna Moody, Edna Peak, Lee Harris Pomeroy, Katie Press, Dora Fight Riss, Fanny Hannah Rosenthal, Marilyn Rudley, Michael Rucken, Jeanette Schwartz, Mary Hertz Singer, Grace Soffer, Max Susser, Ira Tempowski, Ben Woloshin, and Sigmund Zimmerman. Does anyone else with us tonight have a name that they want to share that we didn't mention? And we'll invite those watching at home to share the names of their loved ones as well. And we'll invite those that are with us to rise in body or spirit if it's your custom, as the mourners join me in saying the Kaddish on page 598. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, be'alma divra chirutei v'yamlich malchutei, b'chayechon u'v'yomechon u'v'chayei dechol beit Yisrael, ba'agala b'zman kariv v'imru amen. Yehei shemei Rabbah mevarach le'alam u'le'almei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yit'aleh v'yithalal shemei dekudsha b'richu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechamata, da'amiran be'alma v'imru amen. Yehei shalama rabba min shemaya, v'chaim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav, hu yaseh shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Zichronam livracha, may every one of their memories be for a blessing. Please be seated, everybody. Shabbat shalom. Okay, I'm just going to test everybody. Who wrote the Shulchan Aruch? Caro, very good. Yosef Caro, just checking. So, a few announcements. Please join us for Shabbat services beginning tomorrow at 9:30. So the only change going forward on Shabbat mornings, as you know, is we are live Friday nights. We are virtual on Saturday mornings, at least for the immediate future. But there is one difference, which is if you're normally a watcher on Saturday morning, if you'd like to, you can be on the Zoom with myself. And I think actually the Cantor Lauren will be with us tomorrow. She just, because we made our decision as late as we did, couldn't get her out here this weekend, but she'll be with us tomorrow morning on Zoom. And again, so if you want to join the Zoom, you're welcome. Otherwise, you can watch the stream on our website, YouTube, or Facebook channel. Torah study will begin at 12 o'clock on Zoom. Also, a reminder, on Sunday at 3 o'clock at the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of the South Fork, which is located on the Bridgehampton Sag Harbor Turnpike, we'll be co-hosting, along with Canio's Cultural Cafe and the UU, a book talk discussion interview with Professor Julian Zelizer and his new book on Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. So I'll be interviewing Professor Zelizer, and so those that want to come in person, I believe that is still a possibility. Those that want to participate on the Zoom are welcome to, and those that are going to be on the Zoom, if you have questions, you'll be able to ask them as part of the Zoom as well. A few other things to note coming up this week. Monday, Nida Mitzvah will be meeting at 9 o'clock. A reminder, my Heschel class is now officially moved to Mondays at 12 o'clock. The Social Justice Committee is having its meeting on Monday, okay, at 5 o'clock. Musar practice with Myra at 7 o'clock. Because of midwinter recess, there is no Hebrew school this week at all. A reminder, my Friday class begins at 9:15, and also a reminder to sign up for Maureen's Haven for the end of the month, which is February 27th, Sunday, February 27th. Always looking for volunteers of various sorts. And we have a lot of other things coming up towards the end of the month and into March. Purim not so far into the distance. And again, just very happy to be back in this space. Two other just quick notes. If anybody is planning on coming to the program on Sunday, we were told that they could use one person to help as a volunteer at the front door to check vaccination records and all that stuff. So if anybody is planning on coming on Sunday and be willing to help out, that would be really wonderful. As a last note, for those that get the Southampton Press, if you don't get it, you can also get it digitally, I've learned. And thanks very much to Mark Bitterman, who brought it to my attention, because the writers are too humble to tell me. Our very own co-president, Ron Klausner, and his wonderful wife, co-president of our Social Justice Committee, Andy Klausner, wrote a very powerful, beautifully written, thoughtfully articulated letter to the editor in the Southampton Press about the recent decision to accept the working definition of anti-Semitism as part of Southampton Township's own attempts, really, to combat anti-Semitism, racial bias, many things. But again, the level of care with which this letter is written is really quite remarkable. And again, being too humble as they are to, send it out on their own, please go take a look, read it. We'll try and send it out actually to the congregation wider for those that can't access it. If you have any trouble, Wendy Bitterman is kind enough that's going to give me a physical copy. I'm sure we can make some other copies available. But support the local press. I think that's a good thing to do. But Ron, Andy, you'll extend it to Andy. Thank you for really writing a very, very important piece and for representing the temple, and even if that wasn't the intention, right, in remarkably powerful ways. So we thank you for that, and really a very important conversation taking place very close to home. So with that, I welcome everybody back. Keelan, it's great to be back with you. I don't have a obvious closing song tonight, so I think we're going to do Shalom Aleichem, which we haven't done in a while. Let me find our page number. And this is one where in the past we would stand for it. It is totally up to you. There's a bit, speaking of conversations about what to do and what not to do, there are arguments about this one, I promise you. Same with Kiddush. But if you want to follow along in our prayer books, I'll get to it eventually. Page 627. Page 627. Shalom Aleichem, Malachei Hasharet, Malachei Elyon, Mi Melech, Malachei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Boachem leshalom, malachei hashalom, malachei elyon. Mihi melech malachei hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Barchuni leshalom, malachei hashalom, malachei elyon. Mihi melech malachei hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Tzedchem leshalom, malachei hashalom, malachei elyon. Mihi melech malachei hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We'll rise for Kiddush on page 123. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam b'horei peri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'ratzavanu v'shabbat kodsho b'yahavahu v'ratzon inchilanu zikaron lema'aseh v'reishit. Ki hu yom techila lemikrae kodesh, zecher litziat Mitzrayim. Ki banu v'acharta, ve'otanu kidashta, mikol hamim, v'shabat kodshecha be'ava uvratzon, hinchaltanu baruch atah Adonai, mekadesh ha-Shabbat. Amen. L'chaim. And Shabbat Shalom to all of our friends watching, to all of our friends here. I caught my talis on the back. Tequilin, good Shabbos, and we'll see you back next week, Friday, 6 o'clock. Anybody hopefully who wants to be on the Zoom tomorrow. And get home safe. Please, get home safe.